This presentation was by Mark Engel of DNR and Ken Miller of WFFA as a joint presentation, but we only captured the latter part of Mark's introductory remarks.
Template which makes it easier for small forest landowners to apply that template and be able to get a forest practice application for harvest. And I will admit it was in 2015, WFFA brought a proposal to the Forest Practices Board for a Western Washington low-impact template, of which would include the harvest of hardwoods in the riparian management zone. The board accepted that proposal and sent it to the policy side to work on. And so I'm here today in support of Ken because his presentation is going to talk about the prescriptions within their template. Ken and I are the co-chairs of a subcommittee that is reviewing the prescriptions for the template, and I'll be here to help answer questions if you have any. So with that, I give the podium to
Great.
Ken. I'll stay up here for after.
Please. Thank you. I was hoping Hillary would stick around a little bit more because I was going to take a couple of friendly shots at her. I'm liking her more and more all the time. I think that was a wonderful message that she gave, and I think maybe she got it all along, but I think she's really starting to get us and understand it a little bit better. She's a little bit not PC. You saw it on the news this week. She got in a sack race with the governor, and she wasn't politically correct. She kicked his ass. I thought that was pretty cool. The other thing that she didn't mention was that apparently she has a sign on her desk that's something along the lines says "Do epic shit," and I think you heard part of it was in the forest health thing. If you're a manager of a big organization like DNR, it's got its own legs. It'll go on. When she's long gone, or even when she's shortly gone, it'll keep going and won't remember. So to the extent that she's trying to do some epic stuff, really deal with forest health, make our east side forests fire-wise, that's wonderful. That's epic. I see a lot of gray-haired folks in the audience, old men trying to learn how to, and women, trying to learn how to plant trees, and to my way of thinking, you're not ever going to live long enough to see the fruits of your labor, so that's epic stuff also. Before, and just go to the next slide if you would. Before I start talking about the template, because it's a Hardwood Commission, I thought I'd make a couple of Hardwood observations actually repeating what you've heard, only these will be words and not graphs and charts. WESTSIDE rules are conifer centric. So hardwoods next. Just watch me when I flip a page here and we'll go kind of fast here. Hardwoods are important to the RMZs and the stream health. I think I saw in the news recently where DNR Olympic region and the University of Washington is just starting some new study on hardwoods. So hardwoods are finally in Western Washington are finally starting to get some attention. Next slide. So without management, hardwoods become decadent, as I think Dr. Rice mentioned. Lost potential economic return, functional loss or functional decline as that gets converted to brush holes. Here's a picture of a 44-year-old alder that's maxed out. It's time to cut. But how? As Mark indicated, there are some options. One is the alternate plan process, which allows you to do that. To my knowledge, however, I don't know of anybody, maybe there's a few, that have actually been able to get approval on a hardwood site to do hardwood management within the RMZ. There's lots of hardwood conversions. That doesn't do the Hardwood Commission any good. So we do need a new paradigm on hardwoods so that we can actually management RMZs that protect and enhance the functions. I wish Fish and Wildlife were here to hear Dr. Ice's presentation on how it helps fish, but we need to be looking long term. Hillary mentioned going to be looking at Westside Forest Health, so I hope that the hardwoods, hardwood RMZs are part of that, that look at. So we do need new hardwood regulatory tools. From my viewpoint, RMZ should actually stand for Riparian Management Zone. Changing this paradigm would be epic shit. So, back to what my assigned topic was, the 2015 proposed low impact template. Background information. When they were doing the forest and fish, they did a small business economic impact statement. They found disproportionate impact on small forest landowners, so they created some mitigation strategies. The first was the Forest Riparian Easement Program. As everybody knows, it's huge demand, very few funds to fund it. When I get into the template, if we were to be successful in getting our draft template approved, it would cut the demand for the Forest Riparian Easement Program by at least 75%. So there's a huge incentive there. Maybe we could take the money that we're saved and put it into the next bullet here, the technical assistance that was required by the legislature to be provided to small landowners. We had 8 to 10 people in the small landowner office until we went through the big budget cuts, and I think Mark lost all but 2 or 3 folks. They're playing with the numbers, moving numbers around, and have been successful starting to eke that technical assistance back up a little bit, but we still have a long ways to go. The legislature also created a 20-acre exempt rule, but it only applied to parcels. It did not deal with most smalls that deal with 20-acre or less harvest. So, and there's only a handful of those that occur every year. Similar in many ways to the template proposal I'm going to describe later. And finally, they included RCW language that required, in my language, smaller buffers for our smaller, lower impact harvests. It's more weaselly language that they used, but next slide. So small landowners own over 40% of the or the Washington private forest land. So smaller buffers on our smaller harvests necessarily means more hardwood products going to the mills, because we'll be harvesting closer in hardwood stands. And from my viewpoint, and I think the prior speakers said this, actually create better management within those hardwood stands and within the RMZs. So, Mark touched a little bit on the template. There's several potential pathways to getting a template approved. Science is the way we wrote this particular draft. We had a scientist review our process. The adaptive management program is now contracted with somebody to review the review of our science that we put in there. And once that review is done, then that review will go to the University of Washington for another review of the review of the review. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be ready to sit down and actually talk about the template. This way is looking at past approved alternate plans. So with a lot of help from DNR and the small landowners, we went back and looked at over 200 alternate plans that have been done by small landowners since Forest and Fish. Many, I would say most, as aggressive or more aggressive than the template that we've proposed. Unfortunately, they're mostly for hardwood conversion templates, not low impact, which is the title on our template. I would argue that the fish don't know any difference why it occurred. The only after harvest review of those sites was done by an ID team. An ID team went out to over 20 sites. I think Mark was on those ID teams, and they looked at after the harvest. Okay, so what happened? What were the problems? And more importantly, from my viewpoint, how were the functions actually protected after they can see what the ground looked like? They found a couple of problems. We're going to fix those. Not super big, but they were problems. We'll fix those. The more important takeaway from my viewpoint, is they did a scorecard on all of the functions, how well these really small buffers protected functions. And all I can say is I wish my college scores were as good as those scores were on functions. We talked a little bit about the legislation. The big tough nut to crack, I think, for the adaptive management process is there's alternate plan language requires you to be equal in overall effectiveness, blah, blah, blah. That's some vague language. The legislation for smalls requires smaller buffers for relatively low impact for our smaller harvest. Now, what all does that mean? That's really gray area. So that's where the real rubber's going to meet the road. Bottom line is, for small landowners at least, prescriptions must be simple. And at the end of the day, we need a majority vote, ideally a unanimous vote of the Forest Practice Board. We need state agency votes. We need, certainly we need continued help from DNR, who has been very helpful to this point. We need the Department of Commerce on board. We certainly need Fish and Wildlife. And I think even ecology would be great if they had been here to hear the presentations that we heard earlier. So now on to the template, what I'm supposed to be talking about. I'll say sarcastically, in Olympia this is really, really complex when I'm in all the meetings in Olympia. I hope you'll see that it's not so complicated. So just try to visualize here. This is a stream. This is down in the lower reaches. We're going further uphill. The RMZ, or the stream, and the bank full width starts getting narrower and narrower and narrower, and same here. And then we actually go into an NP stream. So our theory is very simple. No site class. No 1, 2, or inner, outer, core zone. Eliminate those. Just use a little common sense. Go, the wider streams need a wider buffer. The smaller streams need a smaller buffer, and we'll still provide all the functions. So the guts of our proposal is, if you're in, and small landowners, they typically don't own this whole reach. They might have a little bit here or a little bit down there. They're not, and they typically don't do the really big harvests. So if you're up in here, you got a wide stream, 15 feet or wider, your buffer's 75 feet. Easy peasy. Draw the line, you're good to go. If you're down in here, intermediate stream, we classify that as 5 to 15 feet. Your buffer's 50 foot. If you're in the smaller streams, over here, less than 5 feet, 25-foot buffer. And if you're in an NP stream, the existing rules require a 50-foot buffer for the first, 300 or 400 feet, and then you can harvest half of the rest up the stream. It gets really complicated, particularly for smalls. We said to hell with all that. Just make it a 25-foot buffer. We don't care where we're at on the landscape. We got an NP stream. We love water. We want to protect water. Just make it a 25-foot buffer. And oh, by the way, we'll make it on actual water in non-fish perennial waters. So that's it in a nutshell. What does get a little more complicated, and I'm not going to spend any real time on that, there are some options within the basics that I mentioned. A variable width RMZ, instead of averaging whatever it fits your site. If it's 75 feet, you can go a little closer to the stream in some areas, and further away you still have to average 75 feet. There's topographical reasons, there's economic reasons, but some sort of flexibility. And within the first 25 feet of the intermediate and the larger stream, some sort of partial thinning, partial conifer restoration. And one that I didn't include on the slide, which was talked about here by Dr. Ice, if the streams are nutrient deficient, if we really want bigger, better fish, some aggressive thinning for very short stream reaches, I think 150 foot. And potential for small or single tree option within the RMZ for small landowners. These are what we call money trees. You know, with small landowners only harvesting 5 or 10 acres, 1 or 2 nice big cedar trees makes a hell of a difference. But we can't sit down and write out any kind of a prescription for that. That has to be done by the professionals on the ground. So we just want to try to set a pathway so the landowner can at least ask the question, and then when an ID team or the DNR foresters there, they can use their best professional judgment to say, hey, yeah, could the landowner take that tree and not have an impact on the functions of the stream? And also create a little maybe better dynamic relationship between the regulatory arena and the landowners. And on the NP portion of the stream, some overstory thinning. There have been a few alternate plans that mimic this, but not that many. So yeah, I expect a decision to reach the Forest Practice Board by May of 2019. I think that'll be a little over 4 years that we've been in the adaptive management process. It's going to be a struggle to get through those. From my viewpoint, this would be, as a commissioner said, this would be some pretty epic shit if we could get this passed. We would kind of be the experimental, thing. I think we can do some good. So, Mark and I'd like to take any questions that you might have. There's a existing WAC that's basically 2 million board feet per year or less. Yeah. And we don't know how all this is going to shake out. Our current draft does not have any stream reach limits or acreage limits. We've told everybody, we're kind of wide open on that because, we're going to probably be that anyway. Other questions? Well, again, small point, these are not rules. They're going to be a template, and we chose a template rather than asking for a rule because it's a little bit lower bar. There's opportunity in the alternate plan process for more regulatory oversight. Once template's been in and been used and the other regulators get used to it, they look for something about that site that's unique, and then they'll say, yeah, let's go ahead and have an ID team. Otherwise, they go through kind of in effect as if they were a rule, but subtle difference. That's inside baseball, I guess.
Yeah, this would be, I said at the beginning, there's the Forest Practices Board maintains a board manual. There's a section within it for alternate plans for small forest landowners. A template is a form of an alternate plan. This would be put into that section of the board manual, and it actually would come with a form that small forest landowners can fill out and attach to their forest practice application.
I'll give my 2 cents worth. Yeah, I'd love to be that aggressive, but we're going to finish this science review of the science review of the science review, and the people that Mark and I sit in the room with, they're still going to argue to beat hell about what the science is. And for one piece of science, there's another piece of science that maybe counters that a little bit. My personal bias is the more science you do, the more questions you have, not more answers you have. But that's jaded thinking based on sitting in the policy arena for a number of years.
Go ahead, back to Tammy. Yeah, so the Forest Practices Board is mandated to make decisions based on science through the Adaptive Management Program. Right now, and what we're really talking about is riparian function. Forest Practices rules manage for 5 riparian function. I don't know if I need to list them all, of which include shade and downwood, leaf and litter, bank integrity, and
I've got the scorecard here if you want to.
and sediment. I think I got them, Ken.
Yeah.
Right now, there's a proposal comes with supporting science. That supporting science is being reviewed. When they're done with the review and we have the report, then it does. And when Ken said the University of Washington, it actually is the independent science peer review. It's a blind review of the science. We have to go through that step as part of the adaptive management program. When we get a report back from them, it comes to us, the subcommittee, for a final review. We have to weigh all of the options. So it's previously approved alternate plans that have, with IDT review and approved prescriptions, as well as a comparison of how these fit with the current rule requirements. There is one of the riparian function is captured in rule, and that's the shade function, and the rule states 75 feet. If you go narrower, then you need to have the supporting science to show that we're not compromising the shade. That's part of the review right now. And then the final thing is, or based on science, because the forest and fish rules right now, change comes through science. So we're waiting for all of those pieces to come together. That's where a lot of this time comes in. This is a timely process. I think the science review is actually going to be completed during this month, the month of June. Then it goes to ISPR. We'll get it back in the fall. Then we have to deliberate. We'll take it to policy, and then the board meets quarterly. That's why it shoves it to May. So,
Other questions?
right now that we're not looking at the economics, because right now this is within the adaptive management program, so it's very science-centric, and that's the approach we're taking right now, and it's in comparison to the rules. Ken said during the presentation that it does hold that alternate plans have to meet or exceed the rule. We're now looking, and that standard is in reviewing prescriptions against how well they maintain the riparian function or enhance it. One of the things about alternate plan is you can temporarily reduce some function as long as you show the trajectory to actually make it better. And so all those are the variables we're looking at. It's all based on science right now.
Yeah, I think what we do know is, what we heard earlier, a third of the hardwoods are in the RMZs. So if 40% of the small of the private ownership has access to this, it's necessarily going to be more. I don't know how much more it is. The alternate plans also, just the alternate plan process itself has to be site specific, and that our graph up there, we're site specific based on the stream width. Maybe it's just too much common sense sometimes for our policy world, but it is going to get there. And if I could just give an example. So in our, let's say our prescription and the science review that we had said, our analysis said that using these prescriptions were 95% as effective at protecting large woody debris as the rules. Okay? So we have to look at that 95% and then also at the same context try to understand what the legislature meant when they said relatively low impact. So is that 95% or 90% or 85%? At some point in time, even when the science comes back and if there's something there that we didn't anticipate, then we're going to have to look at our hold card also and say, we're just not passing the smell test on this. I would like to be as aggressive as we are over there, as Morris suggested, but this is the folks in the policy arena are choking real hard on these prescriptions. So we don't want to push harder than this. And I think small landowners, everybody, not small landowners only, industry and small landowners, we want to protect the resources. We just think this will do it, and especially when you put it not only in the context of the buffer widths, the stream reach, the size of our average harvest, somewhere around 10 acres, and the recovery rates that Dr. Ice again talked about, probably not significant. So, thank you very much.
Any more